To this story now, Agri-SA's annual Congress kicks off today in Pretoria. Role players in the sector will debate food security issues. Agriculture plays a vital role in job creation in South Africa and has brought in over 43 billion rand in export revenue over the past 3 years. eNCA's Moloko Moloto is on the story and he joins us now. Good morning, Moloko. A bit earlier on, we listened to your interview with FF Plus, Mr. Groenewald, and he was somebody that went on to express himself about the current Transnet strike, which also has an impact, negative one, on the agricultural sector. Talk to us about some of the key points that he raised.
Hello, Mfundo. Indeed, the Freedom Front Plus leader, Dr. Peter Groenewald, is lamenting the ongoing strike by Transnet workers. But without any waste of time, let me bring in the Minister of Agriculture and Land Reform, Minister Chokoti Disa. Minister, let's talk about the Transnet issue. You are part of the ministers who are trying to resolve. How far are we now?
Well, thank you very much. Let me indicate that yesterday we had our first engagement with Labour to understand what, in their view, are sticky issues that they still have a difference between management and Transnet. We then also met in the evening with the management of Transnet, but also with industry. And that was important, in my view, because it's important that we engage all the stakeholders. One, the workers, the management also, to urge them, as you know, that we are not negotiating as ministers, but we're really assisting and encouraging the parties to go back into the table and find one another because of the impact that this has in our economy, and more particularly the agricultural economy. You know, we deal with perishables, and it's the season for table grapes, for berries. So it is an interest that these things need to move as fast as is possible. So part of the engagement with industry is to also get an understanding of where the major constraints are, where we can actually address the immediate concern where possible, and working together in that regard.
In terms of their demands, Minister, do you think they are justified? Of course, they are saying the cost of living is too high. Do you think the double digits they are demanding is just too high?
Well, I think the Labour has moved from the double digits. It's now on the single digits, and they continue to engage with management to see where they can find each other. Obviously, as we know, globally, the shocks that have been there as a result of COVID, the other challenges in Europe, has actually disrupted value chains that has seen the cost of fuel and food on the high. And it's understandable that ordinary people, workers, including myself and yourself, are feeling the pinch. And obviously, as workers are engaging, they are also asking management to reflect on this reality and see how best they can find another without disrupting the entity and, you know, the economy. That's why I'm happy that first phase of agreeing on the picket rules has been done. So they know that this is how we will conduct ourselves within the strike. Secondly, they have not been sleeping, trying to really crunch the numbers, both from the management of Transnet, supported by its board, and the workers' leadership, supported by their membership, to find a way in which they can close the gap. We continue to monitor, and this year in the evening again, we will have the various meetings to see where the issues are.
All right, a final and quick one, Minister. You have heard from Agri-SA President Jaco Minnaar, who is saying that the expropriation bill, which was adopted by Parliament, is flawed. And we know parties such as the Freedom Front Plus are suggesting that Minister Patricia de Lille should actually take that piece of legislation to the Constitutional Court. Are you confident that this is not going to threaten food security, or do you not think that the lamentations by the agricultural sector is justified?
Well, you will appreciate that this was an amendment of an existing Expropriation Act of South Africa of 1975. So expropriation has been undertaken in this country long way before for public interest. However, what the new bill does, including public interest, which will cover the issues of land reform. But what is important, and for me, what is good about this Expropriation Act, it clearly outlines the circumstances around which expropriation can happen, the rules around which that can happen, but also it allows the space where those who are not happy can appeal to the courts. So for me, it is a fair legislation that we can work with as a country. And that's why the president, in his speech today, he really reflected on that matter, that we shouldn't see Expropriation Act as a threat, but rather see it as an instrument that is creating a clear legal framework on how such expropriation.
A very last one, the changes to the ministerial handbook. Do you think as ministers or cabinet ministers and deputy ministers, you really deserve that breather given by the president for you not to pay for electricity and water?
Well, let me just say that if you look at the ministerial handbook, apparently the one that we're talking about now, there's a lot of streamlining that has happened from the ministerial handbook that was there before. And you would appreciate that ministers and deputy ministers and members of parliament actually reside in 2 locations. With ministers, I would even say some of them in 3 locations. You may be a minister that comes from Northern Cape, but because of the work and the responsibility that you have in the country, you have to locate in Pretoria or Johannesburg. You have to then locate also in Cape Town. The dispensation is that one of that house, you will actually pay for it. So it's not like gratis. You will pay for it with all its rates and taxes and services. But obviously, we should look at if there was no such facility that the state offered, the state would have had to pay for hotels every time there's a sitting, every time ministers and members of parliament have to go for a sitting, to go to answer a question, which in my view would be an enormous cost. The fact that you've got these facilities ameliorate this cost in one way or the other.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your time. Much appreciated. Minister Kotoko Didiza, of course, we are expecting that the Chief Executive of Transnet Group, Ms. Portia Debbie, will also be participating in this Congress. The farmers have been complaining, obviously, about the impact that the ongoing strike is having with regard to the transportation of their produces. But also, ESCOM, the Chief Operating Officer, will also be partaking here, the ongoing power cuts. The farmers are expected during power cuts to resort to the generators, and they complain that fuel is expensive. But of course, we are expecting to see what by the end of tomorrow, after this 2-day meeting, what would be some of the resolutions going forward?
Most certainly important to find out what the resolutions are. Thank you very much for that report. That's eNCA reporter Moloko Moloto.